Righto guys, we're just going to run through a bit of a process on how to replace the front brake line on this front axle on your Landcruiser. As you can see, I've got a 10mm, a 17mm and a pair of vice grips. So the tube nut, which is on the brake line, has a 10mm nut. The problem is that generally they are quite tight, and that means you'll end up stripping or rounding over the edges of the nut. So this is why we've got the vice grips. Now you need to set the vice grips up. When you close this, it needs to be very tight. We're only going to use them sparingly because all we're going to do is use them to undo the nut in the first instance. Once it's released, you can go back to the 10mm spanner and undo it with that. The 17mm is used for holding the back of the flexible brake line area whilst you're using the vice grips to crack the tube nut. So that's the tube nut that you need to undo there. And here is the tube nut that is going onto the flexible. So the flexible is on the other side of the shock absorber. Now, I'll see if I can show you the flat section where the 17mm spanner goes. So if you look here, you can see a couple of flat sections. See, on the top there and on below there. So that'll take a 17mm spanner so that you can, when you're trying to undo the tube nut, you can potentially slip in your 17mm spanner. In this orientation you wouldn't be able to, because the spanner will interfere with the shock absorber, but your brake line might be the other direction. If that is the case, like this situation, what you can do is, I can see if I can focus in on that, and there is a bolt here. Sorry guys, I lost the video there for a sec. So yeah, as I was saying, if you want to undo this bracket here, you've got a bolt there that you can undo, and that will give you better access to this nut here on the back of the brake line, so you can hold that with a 17mm spanner whilst you're undoing the tube nut for the brake line. Once you have the old brake line out, it's basically a reverse procedure to install the new one, and then we will move on to bleeding the brakes. Once the new brake line's in, we'll come up to the reservoir and top that up with brake fluid. Once the reservoir is full, we're going to come down to the caliper and we're going to find the bleed nipple, which is just here, and that's your 10mm spanner will go onto that as well. What you need to do is open that up, so push forward, and then that will undo that brake bleed nipple. Just give that a few minutes to gravity bleed down, and what you should start seeing little air bubbles and a little bit of fluid come out. Just give it a few minutes and see if it will gravity bleed. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. But what we need to go into is a two-person brake bleed. So you're going to have a person in the car on the driver's side, and they were going to pump the brake pedal 10 times. And the person here at the bleed nipple is going to control the operation. They're going to call for the directions. And the directions are pump, and then so the person in the driver's seat will pump the brake pedal. When the person says hold, the person holds the brake pedal. They stop pumping and they just hold their foot on the brake pedal with a little bit of pressure on it. And the person at the bleed nipple opens the bleed nipple back up, and then the person in the driver's seat will feel their foot sink to the floor. Once the fluid stops coming out of the bleed nipple, you need to close that off and then you can say pump. That means you can pump the pedal another 10 times, and then the person at the nipple opens this up again. So you need to repeat that process until you're getting no more air bubbles coming out of the bleed nipple. You need to be mindful that if you don't check the reservoir and you drain the reservoir, you are going to introduce air back into the system and completely ruin your brake bleeding job. So do the pump and opening the bleed valve. Just do that 3 times, and then make sure one person, doesn't matter which one, but someone jump around and have a look. Make sure that you haven't drained too much brake fluid out of the reservoir, so top it up.